And the theme of our topic today is protecting ourselves and the people we care for from fraud, scams and financial abuse, and the importance of tackling these important issues within our own families, and a look at the role that payment cards may be able to play. So following a recording of a discussion that we held last week, a recent session around financial scams and abuse and protecting the people that we care about and protecting ourselves, we've invited Aidan McAllister today. He has 20 years of experience of working in the third sector, in the voluntary sector, in the care industry, but also personal experience himself of caring for relatives. Aidan's going to talk to us today about a financial service that he's helped to develop to provide secure banking for relatives and to help family members to assist people in managing finances and money without removing independence. And it's important to say at Irish in Britain that we're not endorsing this particular card, but we felt that it would be useful to share this information with our network so that people can make their own decisions about support services that might be out there that might be able to support family members. So warm welcome to Aidan.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you again. I'm sure if there's any issues during the program, just let me know. But what I'm going to do is not just talk about GuardianCard today, but also just to touch on my experiences with my parents and some of the issues around finance and looking after mum and dad's money, gran and grandpa's money as they get older. So, as mentioned, I'm the co-founder of GuardianCard. The sort of the light bulb moment for me actually came quite a few years ago when I was looking after both mum and dad's money. It was quite difficult because I was living probably the best part of 100 miles away from them. I hadn't organised myself to get power of attorney, so I couldn't set myself up for online banking. So rather lazily, I was relying on just occasionally going through monthly or quarterly bank statements. And I was very lucky, and so is my sister, in that, you know, in those sort of last few years at home before going into residential care, my mum and dad, they didn't get financially abused, but mum in particular got very sort of confused with money. She started leaving her bank card in the shops an awful lot. She started getting people to go and take money out for her, which lots and lots of older people do. But that comes with a risk. So we'll touch on that risk. And as mentioned, I've worked in the third sector for many years, both as a supplier, both working with charities and brokering deals for charities. So hopefully that served me well in the setup of GuardianCard. There's a picture of me and Nick, my co-founder, which I'm immediately going to go past. So what is GuardianCard and how does it work? GuardianCard is, it's a prepaid debit card. So there's other prepaid debit cards out there, and there are other prepaid debit cards which also focus on carers and on the elderly sector. So it's not something that is brand new. What we've tried to do is make it as open and accessible and easy to use for both mum and dad and also for the family. So what we want to do with GuardianCard is, especially if you consider the last sort of 15, 16 months when a lot of older people have been sort of stuck in at home and haven't been able to get out. We want our elderly relatives and loved ones, we want them to be out there. We want them to go out shopping, we want them to go to the cash point. You know, we want them, no, not intentionally, but if they leave their card in the shops, we'd rather they were at least going out and socializing. But what we also want to do is put a ring of security around them as they go out and do that shopping. So the way in which a GuardianCard would work in terms of in the shop or at the cash point, exactly the same as any other debit card. You use it to make payments, you can use it to make contactless payments, but you as the guardian or as the son, daughter, the grandson, the legal appointee to that older person, you get visibility of everything that's going on. So you get to see, just in case there are any sort of dodgy trends happening or if there are some strange spend patterns. That's one of the key things about it. But another key thing about it is it limits the risk should a bad person come into mum's life. So if a neighbour, a friend, a rogue family member, an unregulated carer start doing shopping for them and start using their Lloyd's card or their HSBC card, they could be using that at the cash point, and they could realise, wow, Mrs. McAllister has got £27,000 in her current account, or and I've spoken to a lot of people in the industry. Lots of older people seem to have huge sums of money sometimes in those current accounts. That can sometimes lead to temptation fraud for that person, thinking, well, I'm doing all this running around for old Mrs. Mac. I'm getting 40 quid out the cash point for her, but I'm going to have 10 for myself. And if you don't spot that happening, and if you don't see that in real time, you don't call that person on it. You don't say, what happened there? Mum only had £40 and yet it says 50. Where's the other 10? If they don't get picked up on it, the temptation is to do it again, to do it more regularly, and to do it in greater numbers. So it's a product that we want to keep mum and dad active, but we want to limit their risk of exposure. When we launched GuardianCard, later on in the presentation, I'll come on to a report we did around elderly fraud. We approached lots of newspapers, television, radio, and they were really keen to talk to us, which was great. And the reason is they are forever being inundated with stories about older people being defrauded, having money stolen from them, being scammed. During COVID particularly, there's been a lot of scams around text messages, telling you that you've got to reply to this number with your bank number, or you won't get your COVID test. All of these things which old people are more vulnerable to than the general age population. So we got quite a lot of interest. We got lots of articles in all of these media, and yes, it was nice because it was about us, but really I think what that said was that fraud is a regular story, and trying to get some sort of solutions out there is clearly a need. So as I said, why did we launch it? Both with myself, with mum getting a little bit confused and a little bit sort of slack, I guess, with how she would handle money in cash. My co-founder Nick, his mother-in-law was actually defrauded, so they'd started experiencing someone regularly taking money from that account. So that got us both interested in, well, how do we find a solution for this? So we put measures in place through the card to protect mum or dad's money. So you look at, or I looked at, what really, outside of her main bills, what really did mum spend in the month? And it was really things like sort of monthly or daily trips to the shops. It was the occasional taxi. It was going out and meeting friends for a coffee. And for some people that might be £150 a month. For others, it might be £300 a month. But, it can be as much as it is. We're not limiting, we don't intend to limit what people spend. But with a GuardianCard, you would load the card with that figure. So as we mentioned, in case anyone got hold of the card, they're only going to have access to what's on there in terms of the funds. It doesn't go above that. There's no way that either mum or dad could go overdrawn. It doesn't have an overdraft facility. It doesn't give you credit. It doesn't allow someone just to continually go to the cash point if they've managed to get the PIN number and empty and empty and empty and then take loads more out. It doesn't work like that. So on the app that I would have as the son, or you would have as the guardian of that older person, whether it's family or whether you're doing it on behalf or as a legal entity, you would see every transaction in real time. So you would know that £20 has been taken out. You would know that mum spent £15 in boots. And actually that's really good, because if you think, well, normally, Tuesday is the day mum goes out with her friends and they go for a coffee or they go to the garden centre. If you spotted that the transaction hadn't gone through, that's a good reason to ring up and just check everything's okay. Why didn't she go out that day? You might also spot that, £20 had been taken out of a cash point from a petrol station in Birmingham in the middle of the night. Well, hang on, mum lives in Plymouth. That sounds very dodgy. you immediately suspend the card and find out what's gone on. So again, we're looking to give mum and dad the ability to go out and spend quite happily and freely, but you're getting an update as to everything. You can receive online statements. You can manage all of the cards. So with each account, you might decide, okay, I'm going to have a card for mum. I'm going to have a card from the same account because I want to do some bits and pieces of shopping for her. And in fact, we've got a carer coming in 3 days a week. And actually, it'd be really handy if that carer on a Wednesday could pop into the shops and pick up milk, groceries, bits and pieces, and not have to go home first to pick mum up to take her there, or go home to get cash from mum. If she could do that on the trip in, that's fantastic. So we can allow for a carer to have a card in her or his name. And when that person goes out and does the shopping, you're going to see it on the on your app. You've got the ability to block and unblock cards at the touch of a button, as I said. And in this industry, there are forever changes going on. We'll come on to a few of the ones that we've changed already in the sort of 3 months since we launched. So it's very flexible in what it does and how you can use it. So again, is it right for me and my family? Well, only you know that, because only you are going to be really close to your parents or your grandparents or that older family member, and realize that, okay, potentially, is there a bit of a problem here? Is there a risk? Is there a risk around mum or dad? Or actually, is there a risk around some of the people who are around mum or dad? Do I need to be keeping a better handle on things that are going on? Our typical idea of when these cards come into people's lives are really when, you know, if you think of when I was going through the process, so to speak, it's when you started getting more and more involved in mum and dad's day-to-day care. So you might have brought in a little bit of domiciliary care. You might have arranged to have a cleaner come in once a week or once a fortnight. You could be at a point where you're starting to make a few little adaptations around the house, maybe grab rails here, maybe some raised seats there. If we're doing all of the sort of physical improvements or the physical care to make sure that accidents don't happen around the home, we really need to start thinking about how we're going to protect mum or dad financially. Not just around cash, not just around spending, but there's a whole bigger picture, as we all know, around their home, around their estate, around their, if they own the home, around their wills, etc., etc. And unless we address it as early as possible, without being intrusive and without locking them up and without saying, well, you can no longer deal with money, because that's the last thing we want to say to them. Unless we start addressing that, then it can sometimes spiral before you know what's going on. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of people taking an unhealthy interest in their money, in their benefits, in their property. So this I see as almost coming in after the grab rail. You've realized, yeah, they are getting on now. They need a helping hand. Let's look at their money. So prior to launch, my colleague Esther did a whole load of work under the guise of our In Safe Hands report. And this really dug deep with a number of charities, a number of organizations, really trying to get a handle on financial abuse, and specifically financial abuse of the older generation. And without reading out everything on there per se, what staggered us was the number of people who have suffered from financial abuse. So the first headline there is you know, a quarter of people over 70. There's a massive amount of stress and worry about finance for older people. They're worried about people stealing from them. They're worried about being defrauded. They're worried that maybe one of the children is trying to take over when they're not comfy with that, and the other children are being left out. During the pandemic, that worry went up with concerns, as I mentioned earlier, around scams, around threats, and I've done a lot of work with that generation via various charities on telecommunications type services, and we know, and I know, that whilst you or I may get a text during the day and we look at it and we just think, no, you know, it's got HMRC written on it, they would never text me. delete, delete, delete. You get an email saying that you're due a tax return. We just delete them. That older generation tends not to do that immediately. If someone rings them and leaves a message, I used to go mad with mum about it. You know, someone would ring up and she wouldn't be able to get to the phone on time. And so she'd check the number and ring me and say, someone from this number. So I said, Mum, was it my number? No. Right. Was it Mary's number? No. Okay. If it's urgent, they'll ring back. But that generation will engage with people more than our generation. And that means that they're more prone to be defrauded through scams. And the pandemic has given the fraudsters a great opportunity to do that. So the last point there is really important, with the percentage, 39% of people who admit they're forced to rely on someone else to look after their finances. Now, the interesting word there is forced, because some people will force themselves to have someone else look up because they know that they're not on top of things, they're struggling. They might not even be able to read their statements properly. They might not understand if they've got more than one bank account, what money is what. But there are other people who are forced, or we could almost call it coerced, into having someone look after that account. So that willing person nearby who's helping with shopping and is very kindly just making sure that all the money is paid into the right places, or that we would hope, you know, all of those people are doing things out of the goodness of their heart. Unfortunately, a tiny percentage aren't, and they get involved into, you know, unless you're watching them, you don't know what moves they're making on your parents' money. So it's great if someone is there to help with those things and they're doing it correctly, they're doing it right, they're doing it ethically, they're doing it out of a love for a family member. But we need to be aware that there will be people doing that for their own intentions. And that's where, if you've got that day-to-day cover with something like a GuardianCard, if you've got power of attorney, if you've got the money that your parents have really being kept an eye on by yourselves, you can reduce that risk. So as I mentioned earlier, within the card itself, even since we've launched, we've had adaptations to the card, we've had improvements and changes to the program. One of the interesting ones is with regards to our multi-accounts. So as I mentioned earlier, you could have up to 5 people using a GuardianCard account. Mum would be the main account holder, but it could be you, could be a brother, a sister, could be a carer. They all feed money, or they all use money they use the sort of central fund, which is paid into that account. But what you can do is you can make limits per user. So you could say, okay, mum's limits are going to be a couple of £100 a month because that's what we're going to load into. But actually, if it is a care worker, they're never going to spend more than £20 at a time if they're going shopping for us. So I'll set the limit at that. They're never going to spend, or if it's another agency, they might not ever be looking to go to a cash point on behalf of mum and take out more than £10 at a time. She doesn't need more than £10 at home. So we are forever trying to improve the features around it. We're trying to improve features around resetting PINs, making it easy for people to just have that overall level of security around the card. So this was something that really applied to me. It's how do we talk about money, and how do we have those conversations? How do you talk to someone who might be within your community, who you think might be struggling, either just struggling with money, or might be at risk of being defrauded? And how do you start those conversations without someone else thinking, well, maybe that person's on, maybe you're after the money? It's a really difficult one. It's really difficult for families anyway. Sometimes for one sibling to suggest, you know, we need to do something about mum's money or dad's money. You know, sometimes the other siblings will turn around and go, oh, okay, so you've got your eye on it, have you? Those conversations happen. I've spoken to so many people in the legal industry, within the roles that I've had and still have within safeguarding companies, that those conversations happening. There's a lot of sort of stress and strain between the family when they're talking about another family member's money. So some of the tips that we've got around just awareness and how to have those conversations. Don't isolate your loved ones. So talk to them, get their suggestions, find out what they're thinking about money, make sure they're aware that it's theirs. And if you have a conversation with them, you might find 20 minutes into that conversation that mum is telling you, well, actually, Dave round the corner's got my bank card because he goes and does my shopping for me. That would be an alert for me. That would be a flag. Now, Dave might be the nicest guy in the world, but, you know, mum doesn't want to be giving the card away to anyone. And so, again, you can work out what's going on. You can have the conversation with Dave, perhaps, but also if you had something such as a GuardianCard, you could keep an eye on everything. This is a hard one to be respectful, because we have to be respectful to our older parents. But it seems to be easier. It was certainly easier for me, as I don't know, maybe it was because I was the son, to deal with the practical things around the house. I was putting in grab rails, I was cleaning, I was helping with all sorts of sort of physical care. But I didn't want to talk about money to them. Just, I don't know why. Just it was a really hard thing to have the conversation. So you know, try and have that conversation. Try not to bombard or overwhelm them with information about plans for the money, but we need to talk to our parents. And ultimately, as long as they have capacity, every decision about their finances is theirs. So if they have capacity and they're vehement about how they want to do things, that's their call. So as I mentioned, we have a product that is £7.95 a month. There's other products out there. So there's products that some of the mainline banks have, where you tend to have to be a customer of that bank. So you can get a card for a carer, you can get a card for a shopper. There are things called carer cards, which come through a couple of suppliers. Again, going back to what we said at the beginning, GuardianCard has the ability to give a carer a card, but the main person we want using it is mum or dad or gran. That's the main priority, is that they're using it, they are out there, they are enjoying going to the shops, they're enjoying spending money. But yet there's other products out there, and for the £7.95 a month from us, you would get the ability to have up to 5 cards, both virtual and physical. So mum, like I said earlier, mum can have one, you can have one, carer can have one, maybe your brother or your sister can have a virtual card so they can do some bits of online shopping for mum. All depends on how the family communicate together. And so the card is a MasterCard, so you can use it in the way that you would use any traditional debit card, as you can with all the others as well. You know, there's nothing unique. You go to the shops and you can spend money with it. So I'm not sure whether I've gone over time or come under time, but that's as far as I've got. Back to you guys, and very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Aidan. And I just invite you to turn your camera on now and to start sharing your screen.
Will do.
We've had some questions coming in already, and we do encourage people, if you have a question, please feel free to type it into the chat so that we can ask it for you. So there was one question which is around usage. You talked about it, the GuardianCard primarily being for parents, older parents, grandparents, family members that you care for. The question was, could parents also use something like this with teenagers? Is it only for older people?
They can do. Sorry, I don't seem to be able to get my screen up. They can do, Ziddy, but there are some really specific cards set around the young person's market. So there's cards such as Cuimhne. Oh, let's do that. That's better. So in fact, the relationship we have with people like Cuimhne is, you know, they've got over 1 million customers in the UK with kids and teenagers, and they actually push cards towards us when the same mum, that sandwich generation who is looking after the kids, is also looking after their elderly relatives. So they sort of point those people at us. but yeah, there's kids cards out there. There's always been a business model of this for business cards for people who are out and about with a sort of preloaded amount on it.
Thank you. And could you tell us a bit more about the Safe Hands report and how it came about?
So what we wanted to do when we started was we didn't just want to try and get ourselves on the TV to talk about GuardianCard. We wanted something relevant. And during our research into all the areas, starting right from, you know, the whole demographic of the UK's aging population, you know, we started looking into how old we're going to be as a nation in 10, 20, 30 years time. We're going to have vast amounts of people hitting the century, vast amounts of people now living in their 90s and 80s, where, you know, 20 years ago they wouldn't have done. So we started researching that, and that obviously brought us into line with organisations such as Action on Elder Abuse, who produce all sorts of stats. There's all sorts of stats available in the public domain around abuse and around financial abuse. So we wanted to put it into a report, and we needed someone who the public knew. So we contacted a lady called Jenny Bond, who's done a lot of sort of work as the BBC's royal correspondent in the past and been on the news. And she suffered her mother suffered as she was getting old with sort of early onset dementia, and there was always a concern about how her mum was looking after money. So we pulled that report together. It's available on our website, and we're happy to email it to any of your colleagues if needs be. Hope that answers that.
Thank you so much, Aidan. Just have a question here regarding the card. What advice would you give, or what would you say to family members whose family member might feel like the GuardianCard is maybe a bit intrusive, or that they might be spying on the older family member?
Well, I think the decision on who has the card has to be, you know, so there's two of you as kids and there's mum. It has to be a three-way conversation, and it can be a difficult thing to do. And if, like I said earlier, if an older person has capacity, both to you as the kids, but also in the law, and she doesn't want to do it, can't do it. I think so there's an element of persuasion, I guess. If you're seeing things that are really concerning about your parents or your grandparents' management of money and management of cash in general, if you're seeing things that are really concerning about some of the people who are now coming into their lives, then I guess there's almost like, well, you call it almost like a moral obligation to start looking at these things. Now that doesn't have to be a GuardianCard. You might start looking at, okay, do we need to go and talk to our solicitor? Do we need to make sure that, you know, I've got power of attorney here for mum because one of these other people might apply for power of attorney. There's huge issues around fraudulent applications of power of attorney. So I think it's part of that whole bigger picture of how we are keeping a watching eye. You know, you can't just go in and say, right, give me your Lloyd's card, that's a goner, you're going to have that. It's and GuardianCard is certainly not there to replace their bank account. It's there to act as almost like a sort of a secret policeman that's following them around, just making sure when someone is spending on their behalf or when they're spending, there's just that little level of security to keep an eye on things and to let you know that to let them know that you know, if that works, with in case anyone is trying to defraud them.
Thank you, Aidan. Could you talk a little bit more about PIN numbers? We know that lots of people with, especially people with memory loss living with dementia, have difficulty remembering things like PIN numbers. Could you explain what would happen if somebody forgot the PIN number for GuardianCard, or any advice you can give about that?
Yes, so the person who sets the account up is normally going to be the son or daughter, but it might be set up in mum's name. So there's numerous ways that PINs can be, you can get a PIN reveal coming through to me, the son, on the app, and I can let mum have it. With any prepaid card or any debit card which you get as new, the first transaction that you have to make almost always has to be through physically entering a PIN code. So normally when you get and so this happens with the kids' cards as well, because my kids are forever losing their GoHenry card. So when the new one comes along, we have to go along and do that. And there's an element where you have to work with your parents on it. So it could be that when a card comes through and she's had to change the PIN number, or you're using it for the first time, you might have to use it with them. But of course, with chip and PIN now, is once you've used it once, if it's being used for just incidental shopping, and you're staying under that current limit of, which is now £45, then you don't actually need to enter in the PIN number. Some people still want to enter the PIN number. So there's still a demographic of people when they go to the shops, they might be spending £5.65, but they'll want to put the card in and use the PIN. And so they have to have the number. If they've reached a point where they can't remember the number, then the family have to decide, okay, how do we manage things from this point? And you can change the number for security reasons in a sort of ring-fenced way. But what, again, with mum, and this is obviously way before GuardianCard, her PIN number was safely tucked away in the address book under bank PIN. So I had to change all of that. Hopefully that answers that for you, Ziggy, sorry.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Fiona in now to ask a question.
Hi, Aidan. Thanks for that. Really interesting. My question was around, obviously, because you can physically see the transactions, can't you? So yeah. If you do find out that there is a problem, what's the process then? I mean, would they call you? Would they obviously stop the card, but would they need to report it to the police? I mean, how would that start a conversation about making that person feel that a follow through has happened, or, you know, that their money is protected?
Yeah. So for example, if you you would see the transactions as the daughter, perhaps on the app, and you would see a transaction you didn't like the look of, and you could think, okay, I'm not sure what that is. From the app, you can suspend the card, and you could ring mum, or you could visit her, you could call dad and just say, there's a spend here of £20 at 11 o'clock at night. What was that? Was that you? And if it wasn't you, then the card stays suspended. If you believe that someone has then either stolen the card or is maliciously coercing your parent into spending on that person's behalf, then that is an issue where you need to call the relevant authorities, which would be the police. Normally what would happen is that you would suspend the card, find out what's happened. Hopefully there'll be a simple explanation, and dad might say, oh, well, yeah, but it was Thursday night and I was, you know, I'd gone up to the club with my friends, and so I'd taken £20 out or spent £20. And that's the explanation. There's no fail-safe on any banking system with regards to cards and people spending them. What we need, and what we're trying to do with GuardianCard, is to be able to identify that there's potentially an issue, stop that card so that you can immediately investigate it yourself. But the bigger picture is, if you've only allowed or you've only thought, okay, a couple of £100 is all mum would need for a month, and we'll put that in each month, a bad person could come into their life. It could be a family member, quite often. Well, it very often is. And they could remove that £200 by whatever way. They could, you know, coerce them into giving the number. What they can't do is take the 27 grand that could be in the current account, or start working their way through that. So there's visibility of what's happened. You, as the responsible person for the parent, would just have to find out what's gone on there, because you would be seeing that through the app. Yeah, mum can have an app as well, but all the evidence shows that it's the generation below who are going to use the app. You can suspend it, investigate, and go, oh, okay, yeah, I know that. And actually, I do that with the kids' cards. I've got GoHenry cards for my kids. I get a message coming through saying, well, what was that? Where's the 15-year-old at the moment? What's he done? I'll suspend the card and just text them and find out what it was, and say, no, I took £10 out because we're going to the beach or something. So it's really all about visibility and what actions you then take. You can't stop someone if they've taken it, but you can limit it and you can stop them taking it again.
Great, thanks, Aidan.
No problem.
Aidan, can I ask one? It's a similar kind of a question in a way. Supposing somebody picks up Mum's Guardian card because she's left it in the supermarket,
yeah,
and goes off and tries to use it as a contactless card,
yeah,
in 4 or 5 times, maybe up to the limit
yeah.
of £45. Is there any way that can be picked up other than waiting until you look at your app?
No, because you've got to see the transaction, and that's one of the issues about the the contactless world. And during COVID, it's gone up from £30 to £45.
Yeah.
There's a window of opportunity for the person who has found the card. It's not an ideal way of doing business if you're a professional fraudster, because actually, if you've got the police involved, say you had 5 transactions and then suddenly you saw it and thought, blimey, right, cease the card. Most of those transactions nowadays, if it's in a retail premises or if it's at a cash point, are going to happen in an area that's covered by CCTV. So you would still have to tell the police and get them involved, and they would make the call if it's worth investigating. But ultimately, so you could have someone just chancing it and doing some quick transactions in the same way that they do with all the bank cards at the moment. We don't see it as a gateway to any sort of massive theft or fraud, because what they've got is a Guardian card with the Guardian card number on and with the name. What they haven't got is your Lloyd's card.
Yeah.
And intrinsic within that Lloyd's card that you'll see will be your sort code, will be your account number, and all sorts of things that a good fraudster may potentially be able to use.
Yeah.
But as I said, when talking about if something happens and you're not happy about it, in Fiona's question, is we have to be realistic. These things will happen, and it's all about restricting what that person could do with the card. But yeah, chip and pin's an issue for me anyway.
They can only spend up to the limit anyway, whatever is left of the account.
So they could only spend up to the £45 per transaction. And of course, if you've only got £17 in the account, what they can't do, they can't go over that.
Yeah.
And you can't rack up debt. I mean, I got defrauded in about 15 years ago, where I had about £2,000 taken out of my account from a number of consecutive transactions in America. And I was in Dorset. So how they cloned whatever to do that. Now the bank have a policy, they immediately pay me that back, but it makes you worried, it makes you nervous, it scares you, and it scares the older generation massively.
Absolutely, yeah.
So she could have in her bank account, or Dad could have in his bank account and his savings, could have hundreds of thousands of pounds. Lots of old people do. They've got that money. All the bad person could ever get is the £47.80 that sat in his Guardian card at that particular time.
Okay, thanks, Aidan. That's very good.
Thanks, Aidan. We have a question here from a participant who says, in their experience of working with older people, they tend to like to handle cash more so than cards. Have you come across this? And if so, how have you supported the transition from cash to the use of a card?
So I'm a big believer that cash needs to stay. There's this horrible phrase, cashless society, which I don't like, and the older generation definitely don't like. So one of the things we wanted to make sure we had with GuardianCard was the ability for mum or dad, or the second, third or fourth card holder, to take cash out the cash point. Even within some of the care home operators that we're talking to, they still want to be able to have £10 in the purse in case granddaughter comes along to visit. So whilst lots of shops are now saying, we're not going to take cash, cash is still king for older people. So they have to have the ability to take it out via the cash point, and they have to have the ability to transact in it. And yeah, we can only support that by allowing the card to be used to take money out, and to allow the second and third card to be used. One of the issues about temptation fraud is when that older person wants to have 50 quid in their wallet at home or 20 quid, and they give the card to the neighbour or to whoever who is doing that great job for them, that person goes up, gets 40 quid out and gives mum the 40 quid. Trouble is, during that transaction, she might have spotted, or he might have spotted, blimey, she's got 28 grand in there. That's a lot. And actually, sometimes as the older person, as time passes, their relationship with other people around them can change. Some older people can get quite tetchy. They can be quite difficult. That's just what happens. You know that more than anyone in the sector dealing with older people. And there could just be one day that willing volunteer, that willing neighbour, has been not asked to get money out by Mrs. Smith, but she's been told to get money out. When are you going to go to the cash point? And that's the day where she thinks, do you know what? I'll have 20 quid for myself here. And that goes back to the thing earlier in the presentation about temptation fraud. I was doing some work with an ex-policeman who's a forensic investigator. And so he investigates crimes against older people, normally around the estate and around the sort of general, sort of bigger picture money. And he brought the case to court via the police in Dorset of someone who'd been defrauded of £250,000 worth of value in terms of estate and money and savings, etc., etc. The person who was the perpetrator was 57 themselves, and up until that point in their life, they didn't even have as much as a parking ticket. No form, no criminal record. Something had happened for them to realise that this could be my gravy train here. And you never know the circumstances of anyone in the world. And it started with £10, £10, £10. No one called that person on it. Then it was 20, then it was 50. And then, yeah, let's not muck about with the cash. Let's get our hands on the savings, because there isn't a sort of son, daughter, guardian, legal guardian keeping an eye on this older person.
Right, I see. Okay. Thank you, Aidan.
Aidan, you mentioned that this isn't the only card on the market. How do people find out about different kinds of cards? Where do people go to find out what the different options are? You mentioned GoHenry as a card that exists for families with young people. Where can you find out?
So for the younger people, I think if you put in things like younger person's debit card or pocket money cards or cash cards, you're going to see sort of GoHenry at the top, and then you'll see a variety of others. If you're looking for cards along the lines of our sort of demographic of how we're looking after and caring, if you put in carer card, you'll find carer cards. You might find it if you put in your bank and carer cards. Some of them will have a direct service and product. Sometimes they're a bit hard to find within that bank, but they are there. You've just got to do a little bit of homework. And as you rightly said before the call, people need to look at all the different options. Just realised I'm wobbling the screen.
Thank you so much, Aidan. That's been really, really useful as an introduction to people to understand a bit more about how these kinds of cards can work, to learn how GuardianCard might work. And as we said at the beginning, at Irish in Britain, we're not able as a charity to endorse any particular card, but we do encourage people to look up on the internet, to talk to people, to find out more, and to think about what might work with people that you know and people that you care about. So I want to thank everybody for joining today and for your questions, and especially Aidan for coming back and talking to us today. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone.